Heather Blackmore loves sharing her garden and everything she has learned from it, with the hopes that it will inspire others to get their hands dirty. Gardening in Zone 5B in Chicago area climate from a different zone. No worries. The ideal and the practices are pretty universal. As a former master gardener, she relies on her training to create and maintain a healthy garden, and she is a creator of her website, HereSheGrows.com. Welcome to the program, Heather.
Hi, Joey. Thanks for having me. I've been so looking forward to this ever since you reached out.
Well, I thank you for taking time out of your day, and I'll start with this. As we get to the later parts of summer and early fall, for gardeners who had not had the garden they had dreamed of this year, flowers or vegetables, what words of encouragement can you offer them that will allow them not to give up and to try it again next year?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question, because I think the most important thing we have to develop if we're going to garden is developing a thick skin. I have killed so many plants, and I tell it when I'm speaking and sharing information about my garden. I always, I'm very genuine about just how many things I've killed, and I just see it all as a learning process. I've killed a lot of plants in my garden, and it's trial and error. And I think if you accept that and accept that there will be losses, but there's also going to be a lot of triumphs and successes, and learn from those things and learn about, testing different plants and not being afraid to have something not work out for you, and being inspired to try again with something new, and just keep learning. Don't give up. I think that's the thick skin is the biggest thing. Mourn your losses briefly, get on with it, and find a new plant to try in that space. I think that's the best thing we can do to keep learning as gardeners and growing our landscapes.
Well, that ties into my next question. There are times when landscaping is done and you're just not happy with it. As you were with your patio, you changed it up. You talked about what you did not like and how you went about making that into a happy place. Talk about that experience.
Yeah, so we have a patio. My husband built it about 12 years ago, and where I went wrong is, instead of creating a plan, I always like to create a small plan, just kind of gather ideas about a plant palette that I want to have, what the site looks like, how much sun, and, what's the drainage like, and exposure and all that. And I failed to do that with that garden. I just kind of winged it, and I never liked the way it developed. I mean, the junipers that went in, I thought I was putting in skyrocket junipers, which should have been no more than 2.5 to 3 feet wide. They ended up being 6 feet wide. They were massive. And these are really narrow beds surrounding this patio. So they just swallowed up the space. They looked really gangly. They developed cedar apple rust. And once that happened, they just continued to decline. So I decided to do just look it all over, decide what I wanted to keep. And then I went about and I cleared those plants out. I potted them up and made sure that, they were going to be fine in their containers until I got around to completing this garden. We dug up the junipers, dug them out, got rid of those. And I really needed a blank slate to really get an idea, to look at this space and clear the whole area out. And then I went in and started thinking about, okay, I've got a full sun, southern exposure. It's really hot. I don't want to completely camouflage the patio, because I want to be able to look out from the patio to see my raised bed vegetable garden. And prior to doing, with the junipers there, I couldn't see any of that. It was just this ugly, gangly, these two ugly shrubs. So I also wanted to make sure it was super pollinator friendly. I wanted low maintenance. I don't want to have to be out there. I don't coddle my plants. I want plants that can make it without me having to water them constantly. I water them, get them established. For perennials specifically, the first 6 weeks or so that they go in, they get watered regularly. Trees and shrubs are watered for the first 2 years they're in the ground, making sure I'm on it with them weekly. But I don't want to have to babysit these plants. I don't have time. So that's what went into planning my plant palette. And then from there, I narrowed it down. And, I put in things like drops of Jupiter oregano and helianthus. There's one golden girl helianthus from Monrovia that I absolutely love. It's a blooming machine, and it's always full of bees. I've had more butterflies and different varieties of solitary bees and wasps around my patio ever since I redid this patio. So I knew I was on the right track with what I did, and I absolutely love how it's turned out. It's full of color, and I don't have to do a whole lot with it. It's exactly what I wanted.
And with the bees and the wasps coming in to enjoy the plants in which you have planted, they're not going to attack you or bother you because they're coming into the native areas and they're doing their native thing. They're not going to come over and go, well, I don't like you here, I'm going to sting you. They're focused on the plants.
Absolutely. And I think that's the huge misconception people have is, oh my gosh, we've got bees and wasps. It's a very dangerous environment for my children. Well, not with every bee and wasp. I mean, there are, your yellow jackets, and some of the wasps can be pretty aggressive, but these garden pollinators are, I get right up on them with my macro lens on my camera, and I'm snapping pictures. They don't care. They have one objective, and that is to gather pollen, and they're minding their business. They do not mind that I'm right in their faces. I have no trouble with them. And I absolutely love it because it's an environment that I've created for my kids. My kids have developed an appreciation for all these pollinators. They don't fear the bees and wasps because they know, they're non-aggressive species. And some of them, like the I think it's the white striped mason wasp. It's a big wasp. It's huge and it looks very aggressive. They are totally not aggressive. They are so involved in gathering pollen, and they don't care that I'm there, and I'm there all the time. And it's a environment.
And you're not swatting at them either, because that causes problems when you start doing that to insects too.
Certainly not. And there's no reason to swat because with these non-aggressive pollinators, like I said, you can be right there with them, and they're just doing their thing, and they're happy as can be, and they have no interest in coming after you.
Well,
yellow
go
jackets are a different story.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the yellow jackets are a different story. They're very aggressive, especially this time of year. They get kind of frenzied, and it can be a little chaotic back there with those guys. But with the rest of them, it's really interesting how many species of bees and wasps come around when you plant a garden.
And let's talk about lawns here for a moment. As a country, many of us have the mindset that a lawn has to be pristine, picture magazine perfect, requires hours of work, chemicals either applied by the homeowner or they bring that truck in that sprays and you can't walk on it or have pets on it for 48 hours. Where did we go wrong, number one? And number two, lawn care can be very easy, safe, and organic and it's okay to have some non-grass plants in that lawn.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, it all started decades ago when, aspiring to become a homeowner, as many of us do, having our own patch of grass that we manicure and, keep tip top. I think it's that ideal of ownership and successfulness. And we've, poured all of our resources into maintaining this weed-free lawn that we're just poisoning our waterways and just dumping so much chemical into it. So I also think there's an element of competition among homeowners too, who can have the best lawn. I certainly experienced that many years ago. Most of our backyard is clover, and so it's a very honeybee friendly garden. In the backyard, my husband and I have gone back and forth. He always subscribed to the 3-part series of granular applications. And so we agreed that the front yard, he could do what he wanted in the front yard, but the backyard, which is where my vegetable garden is and, the pollinator garden, I take care of that myself. And it is mostly clover. But we had neighbors in the past who would approach us about, hey, I really think you should talk to this. I've got a guy thing. They've got a guy who can come in and spray these chemicals, because it really bothered some of my neighbors that we had clover in our backyard. It wasn't this pristine landscape. And I'm seeing less of that now, because I think my neighborhood specifically, they're not having the lawn services come in as much. They're not having the wasp control come in and spray all the surfaces as they were doing, 15, 20 years ago. So I think it's becoming less of an issue, but it's still there. And it's unfortunate because it's such a poisonous thing to do. And I think having a lawn that requires very little attention. Like having a clover lawn, I don't do anything to it. And even when we're in drought, when the front yard might be looking fried and brown, it's going dormant. We don't water our grass or anything. The backyard still looks completely green and lovely because it's mostly clover.
Yeah, native.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
When you talk about the chemicals, I was in the garden, I think it was earlier this year, and I smelt this terrible smell, looked up, and a quarter mile across across the parking lot, there was that truck spraying a yard and was drifting across the whole neighborhood of that chemical. And we do this for basically to impress people we don't like, I think is a large percentile of reasons. But it's a waste. It doesn't need to be done, and it's only hurting everybody.
Right.
Because you got insects that are picking that up and are dying from it.
Oh yeah, and I mean, and one point I'd like to make is many years ago, my neighborhood subscribed to this pesticide control service, and they were spraying all the surfaces because everybody was in this frenzy about their children being attacked by wasps on their play sets and playing in the backyard. And so they were spraying all the play sets, all the fences, all the eaves of the house with this chemical agent that any pollinator that landed on it was going to die. They thought it was specific to just wasps, that it was a selective pesticide. But what they didn't understand was that anything that landed on it, whether it was a monarch butterfly, a honeybee, a bumble, those are dying too. So I think I'm seeing less of that happening in our neighborhood now that there's an awareness there. And I've really, through our homeowners association and Facebook website, I've really leaned on them. Hey, you're not just killing wasps, you're killing anything that lands on what you sprayed. So our homeowners are moving. I think they're moving further away from doing that. I definitely don't see the pesticide truck as frequently as I used to in our neighborhood. But when you think of that on a bigger scale, when we're just a single neighborhood doing that, and if everybody's doing that, we are decimating our pollinator population foolishly.
And whether you want to accept it or not, there's a certain marketing aspect because that makes money.
Right. It does.
So you recently posted about growing sweet corn in a small raised bed. Some may think that you can't do that. Others people think you got to have a field to do it. How are you successful as growing a lot of sweet corn in a very small little raised bed?
Well, when you grow in small spaces, you're not conforming to the the spacing recommendations they make. So I plant tighter. I might plant. Really, I use my thumb and my pinky finger as a spacing. So that's about a 6-inch space when it's spread out, like the hang loose symbol that you see flashing. So I use that as my spacing technique. And I'll go through, I use the bed that I planted my corn in this year was a Vigo bed. So it's like, about 6 feet long and 2 feet wide. So I was using my spacing with my thumb and my pinky to give me a 6-inch spacing between each seed. And then I just let it do its thing, and it came up beautifully. And I had delicious sweet corn this year, and it was exciting to watch it grow too, because it grows really, once it gets going, it grows fast. And I think when you're growing in small spaces, you do have to tighten up your spacing and look for plants, vegetables, and fruits that are recommended for smaller spaces. They're showing, you might see a little symbol on a seed packet that has what looks like a terracotta pot. That means it's great for container growing. So that's going to have a smaller, it's going to take up less space in your garden, but still be a very prolific producer. And so I do look for things like that. And this year in another raised bed, I have another Vigo garden. I have one of their trellises attached to it. So I use a lot of vertical space too. And on that trellis, I grew a new variety from Renee's seeds called Incredible Escalator Climbing Zucchini. And with a little help, I just trained it on this trellis. And if you know zucchini planted, likes to take up maybe a 4x4 space, if not more. But with this incredible escalator, I was able to grow it up the trellis and then underplant the base with other things. So it was a really nice use of space with a very prolific plant.
And if you've gardened with a lot of space and you go to a space with a limited amount of space, forget everything you know. because
Right.
it doesn't transfer. But
Right.
if you have a lot of space, you can combine those small area thoughts and like double, triple your area and production, even if you have a lot of space.
Certainly. Yeah, most definitely. So with the small space, I mean, I do kind of make a plan for myself every winter. And so I make sure that I'm rotating my crops too. Sometimes it's not always possible because it's a pretty small area, but yeah, I like experimenting and I don't grow a lot of things, but I think I do pretty well with what I have. And I mean, I'm certainly not a homesteader, growing on that scale, but I just so enjoy having fresh things to offer my family, and having that vegetable garden has been a great way to teach my kids about the difference between homegrown and store-bought and what a significant difference there is.
Absolutely. And as we mentioned at the top of the interview, you're in Zone 5B in the Chicago area, but you plant tropical plants in your garden. What is your practice or your trick in order to get them to grow and then get them to overwinter so they grow again next year?
Oh, sure. So tropical plants, I've loved them for decades. And so I grow like Brugmansia or Angel's Trumpet. I've got different types I've got a Musa Baju or Hardy Banana, cannas, all those things. And, they're very, very tropical. They love the warmer temperatures. So my practice is I let them go dormant. So for instance, like with the Brugmansia, or even in the Hardy Banana, I'll let a few frosts hit it. I won't let a freeze hit it, but a few frosts just to signal to the plant to go dormant. And then they'll shed their leaves. They look absolutely terrible. And then it's at that point that I'll bring those plants into my garage and just let them completely defoliate. And then I'll bring them into my basement. And I do pull back on watering because the kiss of death for overwintering tropicals is too much water. So I put them in the basement. It's completely dark down there, and it's about 58 degrees, I'd say, which is kind of on the warmer end for overwintering things, overwintering many plants. But just checking them monthly for adding a little bit of water. And I don't really measure how much water I'm putting in it. I just add enough. I don't want it seeping out of the bottom holes or anything, but just enough to give it a taste, just so it doesn't completely go, bone dry and die on me. But that's worked for me for years. And then reintroducing them slowly outside because they've been in a cool, dark place for months. So I might start reintroducing them to the light in April, depending on, weather permitting, get them in the garage and maybe put them out like you would when you're hardening off vegetables. Give them an hour in some sunlight and then move them back into the shade, and then keep extending the amount of time they spend in the light before they're outside permanently. And these are all in very sunny locations of my garden. So it can be labor intensive, especially with the Brugmansia and the Hardy Banana, because they are big plants. So my husband is a huge help, helping me move those plants in and out of the house. But they're so worth it because they're such unusual things to have in a Chicago landscape.
Yeah. Well, Heather, we greatly appreciate the time you've offered myself and our listeners. How can our listeners find out more about you and follow your journey through your garden?
Oh, sure. So I write a blog. My blog is hereshgrows.com. And you can also find me on Instagram, Heather Here She Grows, and YouTube, Heather Here She Grows, Pinterest, all the same handle. So I share everything that I'm doing and what works and what doesn't work. And I hope that it encourages other people to garden along with me.
Well, Heather, we thank you for the time you've offered us and the information.
Oh, thanks, Joey. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
For more information, please visit thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.